The best guests on a podcast are those who have achieved immense amounts of success and they're not fussed about people's views on what they say or do. Welcome to the Exiteers Podcast.
Holly, lovely to have you on the podcast this morning.
Thank you, Rachel.
Absolutely delighted to have you with us. Would you do? I mean, I know a little bit about your story, but it'd be great for you to do a bit of an intro, and then we can get into it.
Brilliant. Okay. I've had a lot of different jobs. I think always worked before I had a national insurance card. Just really wanted to earn my own money, and once I graduated in English literature, I worked in quite a senior role for that time, like a quick graduate role in the NHS. So I worked for Strategic Health Authority, and at that time we were banding all the jobs, which is a great thing. So we're working out, why does somebody get paid this amount of money? Why are janitors paid that amount of money? Do janitors do a harder or easier job than cleaners? So it was about getting rid of a lot of the bias between roles. So it was a really brilliant grounding and really fundamental understanding of how the NHS system worked. As the NHS sort of rolls in and rolls out of different structures, they then shut down all the strategic health authorities. So I had a wonderful couple of months where I was being paid, but I could go and do whatever I wanted to find my next job. So I was at a conference and I saw a health service journal stand, and I said to them, hey, I'd love to come and work for you. I understand a lot about workforce. And I did a couple of shifts for free, and then they started paying me, and I became a features writer for the Health Service Journal. Yeah, so...
And was that what you always fancied doing, the journalist?
I always wanted to write.
Okay.
Always been a great writer. I'm lucky enough that my dad was an academic, so even from when I was about 12 or 13, he would go through my essays and rewrite them to a sort of graduate standard. So sort of that harsh appraisal early on really helped shape my writing. I loved doing that job. I then qualified as a journalist and then got a staff role working for Heseltine's title, which was Regeneration and Renewal as an economics journalist. So I absolutely loved that. Went all up to the coalfields all over the UK, looking at various interventions in terms of how we could spend government money to raise the economic prosperity of the people living there. And it's really complicated. And it really resonates with me. I was born in a council house up in Skem, which, if you've ever seen Blood Brothers, it's like the overflow for Liverpool. It's rougher than rough. It's how not to build a town. You know, everyone goes there for their driving lessons because it's just a couple of roundabouts and that's it. So I've sort of seen how a family can go from that, to my dad having a job at the Home Office and, moving down south. So for me, seeing how you can turn their lives around with people with sort of multiple generation worklessness was fascinating. So I did that for a couple of years, absolutely loved it. But journalism just pays nothing. And I saw that the next couple of rungs in the ladder was still exactly the same. So I went into a role as a press officer with London councils, which was interesting, sort of going on the other side. But for me, the political persuasion of the London councils were in the wrong direction at that time, so I struggled writing what I was asked to write. And I went and got a job with the Labour Party out in the European Parliament, which was where my heartlands was. I've been very political at university, and sort of then went and worked for the Socialist Group, which is all the sort of left-hand parties over in the European Parliament, and just lived the most fantastic life there, working across, where that sort of travelling circus of Parliament goes, the UK, Strasbourg, Brussels, and my job was to take these really complex, boring legislative movements and try and find, the sort of little needle in the haystack of something that would be interesting to the press. Because the press don't write about European legislation, it's deathly boring. And I was really effective at that. I would frequently get front page stories for like the Washington Post, for the Times, because I was able to think, if we bring this tiny element to life and we get these pictures or we get this quote, it will people will love writing about it. And I became very good friends with all the media over there. And so David Poyser, I think, is still at the Times over there, still taking contact with them all. And for them, it was a breath of fresh air because they were finally getting the sort of stories that they wanted to. So,
but it sounds like storytelling
yeah,
rather than, you know, a lot of the kind of narrative and a lot of the stuff we see, especially in that space, would be, well, pardon the pun, but dry as a nun's.
Oh God, yeah.
And so therefore it sounds like you kind of really brought it to life, and that's obviously a passion for you.
And I think that's kind of, I saw that as sort of my secret sauce, really, like what I'm uniquely good at. Like my strength is I can take really complex, dry, boring stuff and go, that bit's interesting. And people going, why was that interesting? Or that's not relevant. Or politically, that's not what we want to do. I was like, who cares? Like, that is the bit that people are going to care about. And I think as I've understood more in my career now about like what makes me unique, I think I'm very sort of over the top empathetic in a way that is like I'm able to super sense what other people will resonate with. And I think as a PR, as a journalist, that's and as someone who then can translate that into market access as well, or even public affairs, like it's a super skill. And
it really is.
Yeah.
And I think in this day and age with businesses, you know, the kind of, you know, the old school marketing of here's the features of, you know, and features and benefits of whatever we are selling, product and service, has gone out the arc. I mean, people are looking for how is this going to make me feel? And it sounds like you'd cottoned on to that some time ago.
Yeah. And then I think even more so where you've got this sort of dirge of content, it's about how do you move from the head to the heart? Like, how do you just find that few lines or that metaphor or that bit of colour or something that just sits in people's heads and takes, and stays there. So I spun up a company called Journalista, and our first client...
So Labour Party to Journalista.
Yeah. I read this book, and it was a collection of female journalists, and it was about why it's so important for certain voices to be heard. And it was like an anthology of women's voices, and it was about making sure that underrepresented voices are heard in mainstream media. So I think that name really resonated with me, and also I realised that the sort of skill that I had in finding what was uniquely interesting was something that all of my journalist colleagues shared. You know, like we would listen to a politician wang on for 3 hours and we'd find...
that could be any of them, to be fair.
But a good journalist knows that bit's going to resonate with them. But what I found amazing was these PRs who would ring me up and, you know, constantly be on the end of the phone. They didn't have that skill, but they were paid 2 or 3 times more than we were as journalists. So it's that sort of skill arbitrage that I think I've sort of done throughout my career, where I've gone, these journalists are paid way less than PRs, yet they're way better at the thing that actually cuts the mustard than PR. Whereas the PRs were sort of focused at that time very much on managing the client, producing reams of reports, like coming up with gumph ideas, rather than actually just really deeply listening and pulling out that salient bit that's going to resonate with the market. And so I found other people like me who were able to do it in the sector that I knew and had good contacts in, and was also incredibly buoyant at the time, which was health tech. And it just was like shooting fish in a barrel from there.
If you're listening to this podcast, you are either a massive fan of mine, and that's fine. Alternatively, you may well be working towards an exit. A lot of the businesses we work with are 5 years out, and there are a number of activities that need to happen to make sure that a founder is extracted from the day-to-day, the processes are in place, there is a robust strategy, and there's repeatable revenue. And we spend all of our time working with founders to make sure this is a reality. The gap between where you are today and being exit ready is where most founders leave a serious amount of cash on the table. If you want to have a chat about planning for an exit, drop me a message at thegrafter.com and mention the Connor brothers, and then I'm going to know that you are an Exiteers pod listener. After all of that hard work you've put in, we want to make damn sure that your exit is one worth talking about.
And so Journalista was providing PR from a health tech perspective for startup scale-ups, or back into the NHS, or was it across the both?
A bit of a mix. So
Yep.
I think, like all businesses, you start out with what you have in your hands. So
Yeah, of course.
we started out with the European Parliament paying us like a good couple of grand a month to carry on doing what I was doing internally, but having more people doing it. And very quickly the legislation changed where actually government weren't allowed to use taxpayers' money to get taxpayers to think that they're brilliant, which kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, we could do with a bit more of that thinking in the UK, but let's not get sidetracked on politics.
Yeah. So what they were doing became illegal. So they obviously stopped being a payer for us. And then I just thought, okay, well, where are my other contacts? And they're in healthcare. So we then got we did some work for Greenwich Health and Wellbeing Board. We did a load of sexual health work around with them, and then so we had sort of strong relationships regionally there, and we did well. And then as things evolved and I knew the health tech world well, and there was a lot of that work about, we started to get those clients coming in. And as we did a good job with them and we won awards for their work, more came in because it was all part of a bigger network.
Yep.
And so I think our initial strapline was making, I think we were always focused on making complex issues clear for people. So I don't think we would never sell more Doritos to people.
Yep.
But perhaps if Doritos wanted to really explain the complexity of why they were using a certain chemical in a way that resonated people and they could understand, that might be a brief that we would take on. But we very much just got into this niche really around health tech because a lot of the products were so the same.
Yeah.
And often really boring, and founders just didn't really understand what was particularly interesting about them, and when we were able to pull that out and test it and then run it at scale.
And you talked there, Holly, about the we. So Journalista, how big was the company? It obviously founder led initially.
Yeah.
Where did you go to with it?
We sort of never really broke the sort of 10, 12 people mark. But
very sensible.
Yeah.
People are complicated.
They really are. And it would be hard because I had both my babies during that time, so I'd be going in and out. And we also had a lot of people would do like 3 or 4 days a week and things like that. But what we did do really well, we always had really high profit.
Yep.
And we always had a really high revenue per head, and we paid really well. And so I'd take on more senior journalists who were able to, they weren't PRs, so it's hard, like new business, like they didn't know how to create a PowerPoint deck.
Yep.
They didn't know, but they were able to look at sheets and reams of complex data sets and be able to come up with a story. I kind of had quite a spiky profile team, so people who were extraordinary in some areas and really crap in others.
That sounds like every team I've ever managed, actually, mate. But yeah, I get. But you need that diversity as well.
Yeah, and I think we were refreshingly different. I think we would go in and do pitches and win because we were able to do. We certainly had our secret sauce. When we had a brief, we would often then say, right, this is the brief, and we'd ring up Dennis Campbell at the Guardian and say, like, what do you think about this? What's really interesting about them? And we'd go in there with not these are the journalists we're going to talk to, but when we spoke to Dennis Campbell about you,
nice.
This is what he said, and
so
people's just
heavy evidence,
absolutely, and people are just like, and we'd even have like a little video of him or a vox pop, and people would be like, why are you going to go with another agent that know them when all of a sudden you're getting value from the minute? So it's just, we were just like, I was always just like show don't tell.
Yep.
And we were very much, and I think that's that we were really unshowy, and some clients were like, where's the account management, we want more of this. I was just like, do you really? Like, how about you just get the results? And
well,
actually,
that's it.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the time clients tend not to know what they actually want.
Yeah.
But, it's we think we should get, and it's, measuring on impact impact and results has got to be a hell of a lot more powerful.
Yeah. And we had a lot of deep strategists as well, so it was very much about taking people from one place to another. And some of the clients that we worked with were, phenomenal. Like we worked with Dr. Foster, who were the first people to take in hospital data and be able to say what hospital you're more likely to die at. We got stories into EastEnders where actually,
Wow.
they were talking about, don't go into the hospital at the weekend, you're more likely to die. We were able to move the needle significantly, not just on more hospitals using Dr. Foster, now Telstra Health, but actually changed the way that people were accessing healthcare in a way that meant that the system became better utilised, saved lives. You know, it was, and talking about those sorts of campaigns is what got everyone really excited.
Yeah, that is, it kind of, when you said EastEnders, that Cat Slater jumped into my head, and I was trying to make a correlation between that and health tech, but thankfully I've managed to move along from that. So you were grown journalista. You've mentioned there that you're a mum, and so 2 young kids at the same time.
Yeah,
that sounds kind of hectic.
Yeah, it was, and I think there's sort of 2 things. I mean, maybe a third, but like there's a couple of things that like absolutely transform who you are and your sense of context and how you go into the world. And I think I don't think I'd known a day's anxiety in my life before I had my first child, and all of a sudden I realised, I think, on having my first little boy, which I was doing an MBA at the time, had horrific preeclampsia. I looked like you could pop me with a pin. I was so swollen, and yet I still worked until I went into labour. And I remember rushing down back to Lewisham to go for my, where you go and get your blood taken and everything, like by a midwife. And I remember she started getting me to sort of come in 45 minutes early, which would give me the rage. I'd be like, well, hang on, no appointments now. She's like, no, you sit there and you have a chamomile tea and you calm down. She said, because I cannot hear that baby's heart is racing, and so is yours. She's like, you need, and so, amazing healthcare, but I definitely didn't slow down at all. I saw it as like the best deadline ever, and my brain loves a deadline.
A born entrepreneur.
Yeah. So it worked into it. But I think on having my little boy, I did sort of wrestle with my mental health a little bit at first. Sort of that sense of, if something happens to this child, I won't be okay.
Yeah.
And realising that. And I went back to work very quickly. I went back to work sort of almost full time after 6 weeks. I remember having him in the back of the car. We had a problem with our office. It was half being built, and we'd moved into this new offices, and no one could get any work done. I thought you meant
you had him in the back of the car.
I mean, could have done if he wasn't. I would have done if he wasn't breech. But I think it was. I just remember. I remember coming out of one meeting. So we had a problem with our nanny. I had a nanny before he was born. The nanny kept getting sick. I brought him into the office because I had all these pictures, and I remember this meeting going on, and my boobs were like absolutely like killing me and swelling up. So, and then I came out of the meeting, and there was like half an hour over, and my baby was screaming in the pram, and both the guys in their 20s and they're Googling what to do with a screaming baby. It's just like,
Google's not your friend, boys. Pick the baby up at that point. That's brilliant. I tell you, I do take my hat off to mums who are building businesses and doing, it kind of blows my mind, but some of the most impressive entrepreneurs that I know are, mums to 2-3 kids and cracking on, run a business, but that phrase about, give a job to a busy person. It's never been more. And I, thinking about my own mum, she had 3 of us and then went back and studied law. Wow. 3 of us under probably 8. Probably under 10 actually, and then decided she was going to go to law school for like Amazing. 6 years, 8 years or something. I mean, it was carnage, but it is a superpower. That is. It
sure. Sounds similar to. So my mum was a nurse.
Yep.
She went to they came from Bootle. She was told to go and work in a chicken factory. Came out with no GCSEs. She trained as a nurse. Went up being a district nurse. Supported my dad through his PhD. And then she similarly went back to uni. I just remember her just eating mouthfuls and mouth. I used to have to go to the shop and buy more dry Cheerios. She just would eat all this dry. She did all of her degree, I think, 3 years whilst working full time and having 2 of us.
That's crazy.
And she had ended up her career. She pioneered 111, and she'd be like making Christmas dinner with the health secretary on the phone.
Wow,
she is
what a legend.
She is an absolute legend, and
I
she's
love that.
super inspiring, like terrifying. absolute ball breaker.
Yeah. I think we need your mum and my mum on the next podcast, actually, mate.
Definitely.
That'd make for very interesting watching. So, Journalista, you're building the company, you're getting some brilliant clients, you're, by the sound of things, over-delivering for those that you're working for.
Yeah.
Did you go into that with selling the business in mind? When did that kind of thought process around, actually I've built something, but I want to, take some chips off the table. When did that start to percolate?
So I think about sort of year 5, I started realising my own limitations as a founder.
Yep.
So I've got quite a spiky profile in terms of like things that I'm amazing at and some things I just have a massive blind spot at. And I think because I went into running my business quite early doors, I hadn't really experienced, a decent manager. I hadn't really experienced working in a company that wasn't dysfunctional. So there's a big couple of gaps in terms of my skill set. And I did invest in, obviously I did my MBA, I did coaching, I did all of these things, but I kind of didn't have that feeling of how good should feel, especially within a team. So I would build a team and just struggle to get it cranking really in the way that I really wanted to. So I took on an advisor, and they were very much like, actually, I think, the best thing would be to grow into a bigger company and do that. And so I got courted when we were winning awards and things like that. I had quite a few businesses like Luther Pendragon and some other bigger businesses were like, actually, we'd love to buy you, we'd love to do this. But when the offers came through, they just weren't interesting enough. And so I sort of shied away from those over the years. But it was just something, maybe like 1 or 2 bits of interest a year. And then I think it just came to a head, really. My little girl was 2. We'd moved to the countryside, which was impossible because actually I couldn't just hop in a taxi and be home in half an hour.
Yep.
I don't think I'd been a bit over-ambitious in terms of what I could achieve doing that. And so I had a conversation with somebody who we'd done a lot of work together over the years, shared a lot of clients, and it sort of spun out of that. But yeah, I think...
So they were a known quantity, the acquirer. Interesting.
Yeah.
And you'd mentioned having an advisor as part of that process.
Yeah.
So, once that kind of deal got going in way of, building things like an information memorandum and a data room, was that stuff that the advisor helped with, or was there corporate finance? Was there lawyers?
So we had lawyers.
I hope there was lawyers.
Yeah, we had lawyers. We did the deal really quickly. We did the deal from the initial conversation to signed in 3 months.
Love that.
And it very much had that momentum. And thank God it did, really, because then we hit COVID like very shortly afterwards. But we knew each other really well. We had shared loads of work and contracts. And also, I am terrible at keeping secrets. Always play poker with me, like you can tell. My team could smell something.
Got a pack of cards over there, actually.
I mean, I can keep them, but it's like, I think, it's like I'm very discreet, but when it's my own stuff, like you can read it in me. I'm quite so my team knew something was sus, so they could sort of tell something had changed, and so we kind of needed to push it through quite quickly before any of them left.
I think there's a similarity in us there, because I found it hard.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm kind of lying to people.
Yeah.
Especially if it's a tight, close-knit team.
Yeah.
When I went through my exit, we were selling to a listed company. So I actually had to have the management team under contracts, legal contracts, to share the information.
Yeah.
But I found myself, feeling really out of sorts for a period, because I knew that, these conversations were happening. Yeah, it's a difficult experience, that.
It is. I think someone best described burnout to me as having to work in a way that's analogous to your values. And one of our actual stated values as a team, in terms of the work that we did for our clients and in terms of how we worked internally, was transparency. Yeah. So to all of a sudden just not living that value, and I was asked, also I'm working with a team of investigative bloody journalists. Yeah. Oh my God.
Like having an MI5 on your case. Yes, I hadn't quite thought about that. Yeah, we didn't have quite the same approach with a team of developers. No. They were not quite as switched on in that department. But I think it's the same principle, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so deal was rapid.
Yeah.
And I guess deal, you'd mentioned you'd done a lot of work together, so there's already a partnership with the acquirer, which means that you've road tested them, they know you. And did you go over as part of the deal? Were you tied in for a period of time?
Yeah, 2 years.
Okay.
I think it was 2 years.
2 years?
2 years or 3, 19, 29, 2 years.
Yep. And how was that? How did you find that?
Well, the initial few months were, I was not prepared for the anxiety that hit me like the ceiling fell in when we signed the deal.
Interesting.
Physically, I had what felt like norovirus, for 2 days. So I remember writing the press release whilst, by being probably one of the illest I've ever been. And it was so weird. It was almost like a stress reaction. Yeah. But so, I was sort of laying on the floor of the bathroom for 2 days.
Wow. It is a huge, it is a hugely indescribable feeling.
Yeah.
Because there's an element of, I'm selling my baby. There's huge kind of, I went through a lot of that emotional stuff myself.
Yeah. And then I had 2 weeks of complete insomnia. Like, wee Willy Winkle walking around the house at 4 a.m, unable to knock myself out. And it was just something I'd never experienced insomnia before in my life. So that was really tough.
Yep.
It subsided. But I think it was like this overwhelming feeling of like, I'm going to be caught out. Like, they were a very, very smart team. And I had this massive imposter syndrome. I think, it was almost like this weird class thing came out of me. A lot of the people who worked at the company that acquired us were sort of more private school.
Yep.
They'd culturally things like they would call each other by their surnames.
Wow,
sort of,
like military.
Yeah, but all funny, it would be like, but it was a bit like girls at private school do that with each other. So it was just, I don't know, it just, and they sort of had these phrases like, that person's whip smart, and it was a bit Mallory Towers,
Yeah.
And it was absolutely fine when I was friends and working with them, but all of a sudden being in it was like it just, I don't know, it came out of nowhere, like I just suddenly like really doubted myself, and
I think that
weird.
feeling's more common than we hear about. I definitely went through a similar feeling when I sold different, and it was and I did a lot of thinking about this as to what had caused that, but for me it was the feeling of there's a lot of stuff that I hadn't sorted or I had let happen in the business because I was the puppeteer. I could orchestrate it, that I hadn't sorted. And I really had to look at that after as to why was it acceptable for me to have allowed that to happen while I was running the business. But then it was like panic stations, getting it sorted out for the new buyer. And so I definitely had that imposter syndrome, but I had it in a different way. But the Mallory Towers thing made me smile. I had a couple of years at an all girls private school, and Jesus, I mean, if you want a baptism of fire, it with a northern accent, in a very posh school in Ascot. I mean, fuck me,
Wow.
It was mental.
Yeah.
I mean, I absolutely loved it. After I'd explained that I was in charge after year one, but year one was fucking hard work. Anyway, we digress.
Interesting.
Let's get back on message. But and how did you handle that? Because that sounds like an intense period.
It was. It was. I mean, I think rightly or wrongly, I sort of ended up at a therapist's door.
Yeah.
And
rightly, I would say.
Well, do you know what? I actually would say wrongly.
Interesting.
Because when you're going through an earnout, that is not the time to unpack your ship.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Some help around the problem in hand, perhaps.
Yeah.
But not a fundamental look at everything.
Yeah. I walked in there and I said, I think I've got ADHD. I said, I keep having these repetitive thought patterns. I literally can't stop. I'm able to metacognate about them being unhelpful. I know, so I've had so much coaching. I had loads of coaching, and my coach just said in the end, I cannot get around this sort of negging voice in you. Like she was like, you just constantly, and I was like, and she was like, I think there's something else going on. You need to kind of unpack else that's beyond coaching. And so this therapist was like, oh, great, most ADHD is actually trauma. Let's unpack a load of trauma.
Wow.
So I was just a bit like, okay. And so then we did all of that. And 2 years later, she was like, I think you just have ADHD. I was like, right.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping to hear 2 years ago.
And I think like all processes, you have to go down before you go up. And doing that whilst going through it, I think it's so important to actually, it's why I'm really passionate about mental health. I'm really passionate about the context of mental health and the way it's provided, and why I sort of go into coaching, and a lot of what I'm coaching sort of straddles all of those sides. I actually think that you really have to think about the context and the the sort of neurology of that person before you go in there with just like, well, this coaching helps 7 out of 10 people. Because I think the first rule of anything should be first do no harm.
I totally agree. It's a really interesting point, that, because I think I've had years of therapy for varying things, and I'm a massive fan of coaching and mentoring. But I think we often find ourselves at these experts' doors when we're not in a great place. But understanding that bigger picture sometimes is super powerful for the reasons you've explained. And so you go through the earnout. You're not with Journalista now. So what was the kind of decision around that?
So I think we had 2 years of the earnout. We made our figures. We were sort of it was good and bad COVID for us, because initially, digital health became the number one thing that everyone wanted to talk about. Everyone who had digital health products suddenly went from being like priority 86 to priority number 1. So it was like, the figures came in thick and fast at the beginning, and I innovated some interesting products. Like we had a shared COVID press office that were able to service multiple clients at the same time and put different stories out and become like a real hub for digital health stories across all the media. So that was a great product that we sort of spun out quite quickly. But then actually after a year, that you were just unable to get into the NHS or to talk about them. So market access became moribund. And so actually that then made things, and people just weren't talking about anything in the media apart from COVID. So it then made what we were doing doubly hard. So I think we had both sides of that during COVID. So it was a very unusual time to be doing an earnout. But, we went through it. It was successful. But towards the end of it, I couldn't sit down. Like I remember doing a pitch to a load of orthopedic surgeons, and I couldn't sit down because I had sciatica in my leg that was so bad it was like getting punched in the face when I sat down. But I had coped with it for so long, I kind of didn't realise how bad it was, but it was getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And I saw a surgeon. They're like, you're going to have that back surgery. And weirdly, rather than just staying at the company and taking 3 months off or however long I did it, I sort of felt like I didn't want to be a burden, so I left. And so
another typical entrepreneurial approach to things.
Here I am in a well-paid job with people who appreciate me, with great bonus structures.
Not a permanent member of staff at all who would have gone, great, let's have 3 months off. I'll put my feet up. Literally. I
literally had this like, God forbid I should be a burden, let me take myself off into the back garden and die feeling. I left. I went and had back surgery. Had a very difficult year because actually I was very nervous about surgery. So I had sort of a year on, the sort of opioids that make, that sort of you've heard a lot about in the US. So I was on like oxycodone, codeine, naproxen, like everything. It was like sledgehammer approach with painkillers to try and see if I could avoid surgery. And then in the end, I ended up being an emergency admittance and I still don't have any sensation in my right leg because I put it off for so long. So it was a pretty rough first year out. But
sounds
then
very rough.
Yeah. But then and then my victory lap of like when, you know, I sort of started coming out with my story of like, I sold my agency, it was really successful, and I was asked to go and talk at, so I was invited to Agency Hackers, which is a big network for agencies. So I went
twice in 24 hours I've heard about Agency Hackers.
Yeah, so when I was, I had a chat with a guy, Ian, who runs that, and he called me and was like, this is such a great story. Like, I sold my agency and ended up in a wheelchair, so they paid for me to come out to Ibiza, and I spent like a week there mixing with the agencies and, you know, being on the lineup with Rory Sutherland. But
nice.
It was quite an interesting victory lap of like that being your story.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, but what was helpful again is that I was able to share that story in a way that actually encouraged quite a few people to think about different ways of selling their agency. So quite a few did employee ownership schemes, and quite a few people also came to me to talk about coaching. And I think what often resonates with the people that I coach is that I'm just really honest about my own side and sort of know, you know, I think quite a lot of coaches are sort of very like, right, let's sit down and go through your P&L, let's do that, let's do it. But it's more for me about how are you optimizing your strengths, like how are you staying where you feel deeply energized, and also just holding space for people to process some of the more complex emotions that they go through, either in a sale or in the run up to the sale, and just and process them together without feeling judged or how, you know.
It's a unique skill, I think, that, and you're right. There's a lot of there's a lot of business coaching that can work through the technical side of some of that, but I think the emotional side is the bit that, you know, we're all getting round to realising is fundamentally, you know, the most important, because, you know, why are we here?
Yeah.
Why are we doing any of this stuff? You know, why are we driven as entrepreneurs to build and sell and, you know, more than likely go again, and unpacking some of that?
I think it's journalism and coaching feels so similar.
Yep.
I think there's so much power in the story that we tell ourselves about our life, you know, and that is what fun, you know, two people can live exactly the same life and have totally different levels of happiness because they see their narrative in a different way subjectively.
Yep.
And so I think, you know, if you're able to listen deeply to someone and then share what you've heard back with them in a way that highlights parts of it that resonate with their, and like it's helping them see it and see their story in a way where they're able to connect with it and move forward with it in a better way. You're sort of almost doing what you do to a product, you know, you're saying that's the bit that's interesting, let's look at that more, you know, and then actually what you're saying, and build a narrative that they care and believe deeply in, that's going to get them to the next bit.
I get that. I've got a feeling we could talk all day, but I'm also mindful that we'll be getting thrown out the studio in the not too distant future. So, a couple of final questions from me. So, you're clearly not in a wheelchair, which is good news. So, the surgery was a success.
Resounding success. I went into it very, very fit and I'm running 2 marathons in April, and I ran an ultra marathon last year. So actually I couldn't run for years because of my back problems. So it is phenomenal, absolutely well worth it.
Okay, well, that's amazing news. And just in case anybody hadn't picked up that addictive tendency, well, you mentioned 2 marathons in 1 month. I'm like, whoa, okay. Not that impressed by my 2-mile run this morning. So, post selling the business, we talked a bit about the emotional impact there. You've gone on and you have built out a coaching practice, and you're also doing some work for us from a Grafter perspective. So talk to us about those areas.
So I think when I sold the business, I wanted to not be sitting in front of a laptop for the rest of my life writing PowerPoints. So I thought,
not.
Yeah. Actually, I weirdly miss it sometimes.
Just talk to Claude, it'll do it for you now, mate.
Exactly. So I wanted the job that got me outside.
Yep.
And so, and I'd always been a very outdoorsy person. And so I sort of created a job that enabled me to do that, which was taking founders and their teams into like biodiversity restoration environments like farms, coastal areas, like really beautiful places around the UK, and get them to do team building in a way that move the needle for them on some like big organisational challenge levels. I think some of the things that were behind that as well were when I had my own team, that was really hard to do. You know, finding that time when you're spending that time out of the office together, like how can you make that compound for you in the business? And similarly, when I did my earn out, we had some away days that I think just didn't quite mesh with the direction that we wanted to go in. And so I was like, how can we do this in a much better way? And I'm still endlessly fascinated about that, you know, the whole group dynamics, the whole continuity, how a place and a space and the food and the, you know, sensory experience of being somewhere can really shape how you connect to the purpose and the people in the business.
Yep.
And, you know, I think some of the best things I've ever eaten have been the simplest things, but enjoyed outdoors. So it's helping people create those experiences. And I think also it's a lot about, when I look back on my 10 years as a founder, like what do I really value about what I did during that time? You know, see, the work we did was amazing and, you know, truly life-saving in some places. But what I really connect with are the experiences that I gave the team. You know, the opportunities that they had to do things that they'd never get anywhere else. And the people that I stayed in contact with and, you know, and have worked with me, like some work at Number 10 now. One is head of CNN in Beijing. You know, they've gone on to do these phenomenal things, and that pride that I have in having been a part of their journey and shaped that in some way, I think is actually what really resonates with good leaders. And so I wanted to create a business that helped leaders do more of that and shape more of people's future in a way that also aligns with something that's really important to me, which is, you know, actually restoring the health of our ecosystems. Because I think fundamentally, like I'm not like that's going to save more carbon, create more beautiful places, keep people, you know, keep the economy going in a way, in a more long-term strategic way than anything else. So it was that business was about that, and we're now pivoting and doing things that are more across the UK rather than just in the southeast. But yeah, it's been a really fun experiment for a couple of years.
Oh yeah, I love that. And so you're working with founders, or you're working with corporates, or blend?
A blend. So I think I naturally resonate with founder-led teams. So you know, but actually we did quite a lot with the biotech space, and they were still, you know, so it wasn't the founder who was the CEO, but the CEO is still very close. They probably would have like a investment stake in the business. So they're still very close to the mission and purpose. And, you know, businesses like sub 50 sort of 50 people as well. That sort of, so you can still work with them. I mean, we all take the senior leadership team out, but those, I went to an event yesterday at Goldman Sachs, and it's just those big corporations, it's just a different breed of people. You know, we have had people from Deloitte and people like that come down, but it's, for me, the energy of people who work for a business where people have skin in the game, who are still in the business, is it's just a different, it gets me going in a way that big corporates don't.
I love that. And we met at a Grafter event, not earlier not this year, last year. And got chatting, and be interesting for me to understand what kind of appealed around the Grafter as well.
So I found you on LinkedIn. You shared a story about...
I'm normally found on LinkedIn, mate, frequently. You
shared a sort of very heartfelt story about one of your stepchildren and their engagement in the NHS. And I think it was at a time when I was thinking, you know, I'm loving the business I'm building, I'm loving the coaching practice that I do. I really want to be part of a bigger team. Again, you know, I really want to be working with people who are also unashamedly them. And don't feel the need to sort of dial themselves down or squash themselves into a box in order to be palatable. And I say that seems, I was like, who is this woman?
Who is this lunatic?
And as I saw that actually we shared loads of contacts, and you worked in health tech, and I remember the business that you built, and it sort of felt like really synergistic. So I just reached out to a member of your team and said, can I speak to this woman? Can I work with you? You know, I've exited. I'd love to. I think this team is something I can work in.
Well, we are very excited to have you on board, and looking forward to doing a bit of a double act with some of our new clients over the next couple of months. It's funny, our paths must have, or should have, crossed because you know, I sit on the board of a health tech PR agency as well.
Yeah.
You know, you're thinking to yourself, how did this not happen? But timing, as they say, is everything. And Holly, where can people find you? So if people are listening and want to reach out and talk to you about your coaching, how do they track you down?
I think the best way is to look me up on LinkedIn. So I'm Holly Tennock on LinkedIn. I think I'm the only Holly Tennock that there is. It's a very rare surname.
Ever.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or you can just email me very simply at holly@wilder.work, wilder.work.
Brilliant. Holly, we definitely could talk all day. Really appreciate you sparing the time. Thank you.
Loved it. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Before you go, if you like what you're listening to on the Exiteers podcast, like, review and subscribe. Is that right? Okay, perfect. Cheers.